So, the cosmological argument failed miserably, but instead of just admitting it, let's just change a few words here and there and create something new. Except that doesn't work either. This is all meant to appeal to dumb people who just don't understand how reason, logic, or critical thinking works. That sounds like a perfect place to take a look at Daniel King. So, we're back to Daniel King's Proof for God series, this time with his video on the Kalam Cosmological Argument. I thought that was coming last time, but it didn't work out that way. If you were expecting something brilliant to drop from his lips, though, you're in the wrong place. This is effectively just blowing William Lane Craig, and Craig fails miserably enough on his own. But maybe we can get a laugh here and there and figure out exactly where King has gone wrong. I mean, besides everywhere. So let's get to it and see just how bad this argument can actually be. Because I don't think I have to warn you, this is going to be really, really bad.
What is the Kalam Cosmological Argument?
Well, we'll get to that. I did want to stop here because in one of my earlier videos, I actually got a copyright claim on my video based on the music that he's playing when he struts. I fought it, and at least so far, it was the only video that I've actually had that problem with, but I figured let's just have some fun with it so I don't have to put up with that crap anymore. So here's something a little more appropriate.
The cosmological proof says that everything that exists has a cause. However, it has been pointed out that if God exists, then God also must have a cause.
Which is why the cosmological argument doesn't get used very often these days, because people started pointing out that either God needed a cause or God doesn't exist. Pick one. I pointed that out in my big two-parter that I just did, and that's why William Lane Craig reinvented the cosmological argument as the Kalam, because he could just arbitrarily assert anything that begins to exist, and then define God as something that didn't begin to exist. Of course, that doesn't save you because it's just an arbitrary assertion, not one borne out by evidence, but we'll get to that pretty soon, I'm sure. So go ahead, Daniel. Let us know where you're going to go with this, because I predict right now it won't be anywhere intelligent.
But since God has always existed, an alternative framing of this argument has been proposed.
Now, I find it funny that if he knew that this was a problem, why didn't he bring it up in the video on the cosmological argument? That tells me that he didn't plan this series out very well, and likely that he had no clue whatsoever about the problem when he made his other video. Or he was being dishonest and he didn't want to disappoint his audience because, he knew it was crap. If he knew that there was such a massive problem with the cosmological argument, why in the world would you include it in your series at all? Now, I've brought this up to apologists before who are pretty much doing the same thing, and they really don't have any good answers, do they? If they just rejected ideas that can be easily debunked, they'd really have nothing else to say, would they? So they just throw stuff at the wall, and they hope that something sticks, and then when somebody points out just how stupid the whole thing is, well, they'll quietly move on to something different. And we see this among the religious all the time. You will say, give me your very best argument, the one thing you've got that will convince me that you're right. And when they do that and it doesn't convince anybody, well, they change their tune, don't they? Because they don't actually have any good arguments. And neither does Daniel King.
William Lane Craig calls this the Kalam Cosmological Argument. It goes like this. Premise A, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise B, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe must have a cause.
Sure, but this whole thing fails on multiple accounts. First off, premise A is faulty because we know lots of things, particularly quarks and other subatomic particles, that don't seem to have a cause, at least not one that we can show. Secondly, premise B fails because we don't know that the universe began to exist. Our particular instantiation might have begun to exist in its current form, but that doesn't mean that the overall cosmos, everything that actually exists anywhere, began to exist in any demonstrable way. You, for example, never began to exist in the sense that Craig means. You are just a rearrangement of existing materials. You began to exist in the form you're currently in, but that form changes over time. You are not the same person as you were 10 years ago. Every couple of years, every atom in your body changes. Is that a new you? Or is it a you that has just changed form? But the biggest failure in all of this is the fact that nowhere does it ever even mention God. Not once, not ever. God does not appear anywhere in this argument, which is why it isn't even an argument for a God. You have to remember how these arguments are supposed to work. There's a major point, a minor point, and a conclusion that is drawn directly from those 2 points. You have to mention your conclusion in your premises, and nowhere here is God ever brought up. Thus, who cares?
It can be demonstrated scientifically that the universe had a beginning.
No, it can't. In fact, of the numerous models that we currently have about the universe, the majority of them don't even address a beginning. The Big Bang isn't a beginning. It isn't the creation of the universe from nothing. It is an expansion of the universe from a pre-existing state with pre-existing materials. It's not magic. And that's the kind of thing that the religious seem to want to think it is. I bet King doesn't even know that. Most apologists don't, because they're just stupid, and this is just a dumb, entirely untrue assertion. And I trust that nobody is really that surprised at how ignorant King is.
The second law of thermodynamics states that things left to themselves tend towards disorder.
Which is true, but not in the way that he's trying to use it. The highest level of thermodynamic order this universe has ever seen was at the very moment of the Big Bang, and it's all been downhill since then. What you see when you look around today is incredibly thermodynamically disordered. You're just used to it, and you interpret your experiences as the norm, but thermodynamically, and remember, that's what we're talking about here, our universe is a complete mess. But again, he doesn't know that, does he?
In a closed system like the universe, the total amount of usable energy is decreasing and will eventually run out.
Yep. And he extrapolates that means that at some point in the distant past, that means that somebody had to magic it into existence. Yeah, says who? Because entropy can be staved off by the addition of energy from an outside source. I mean, look at the Earth. That's how evolution occurs. And I know these people don't like evolution, but too bad. We've got this gigantic source of energy called the sun that constantly adds new resources into the system. And that's how nature temporarily slows, stops, or in some cases even reverses entropic processes and allows life to form. Eventually, in a couple billion years, the sun is going to burn out and all that we have will end. Whatever happens to be left on the planet at the time will die because entropy will take over. Welcome to reality. Give it a shot sometime.
Scientifically, this is referred to as entropy. Because of entropy, the universe moves irresistibly towards disorder. Because of entropy, the batteries in my flashlight stop working. Because of entropy, a perpetual motion machine is impossible. Because of entropy, the sun will eventually run out of energy and become a cold, dark ball.
Yep, but understanding how this works was to say that there isn't a sun analog, something like that, beyond our universe that charged up the initial state and led to the Big Bang. He'd like to think that it was his God, but there's absolutely no evidence for that. There's no evidence for any of this. This is all stuff we have to postulate, but that doesn't make it his imaginary friend. What if the laws of nature in this larger cosmos didn't include entropy? What if the physical laws that we see only exist within the confines of our universe? What if universes just appear all over the place, each with their own independent set of laws that appear in their own big bangs? Now, we don't know any of this. These are all just pure conjectures, but so too are their claims about gods. It's just stuff that they're making up because they really like the idea. But they have no evidence for any of it at all, and you shouldn't believe anything without evidence. When you don't know, you have to say that you don't know. You can't just yank emotionally comforting fantasies out of your asshole.
The fact that the sun is shining proves that the universe had a beginning.
No, not really. Again, he's mistaking our particular instantiation of the universe with the beginning of absolutely everything because he has an emotionally comforting goal in mind. He really wants it to be true, but that doesn't mean that it's actually true. This is where the religious, and it's not just a religious problem because lots of people fall into this, but this is where they tend to go wrong. A, nobody owes you an explanation. You either have one supported by the evidence or you don't. And B, nobody gives a damn about your fee-fees. Just because you really want to know, that doesn't mean you actually do. Knowledge comes when you find it, not when you want it. Knowledge comes when you have the evidence to support it, not just wishful thinking. This is something that people like Daniel need to figure out. But they're not thinking about any of this stuff rationally, are they? And they likely never will.
Since the universe moves towards disorder, the fact that there is order in the universe today proves the universe had a beginning.
But that says absolutely nothing at all about any gods. He's just going to leap to that conclusion because that's the conclusion that he likes. But that doesn't make it so, though. All religions do this. They all have their own particular comforting bugaboos that they just assume are true without any evidence to prove it's true, because this isn't about intellect, it's all about emotions. The second that you realize that about the religious, that's the second you stop taking any of them seriously. If you get into a car accident, you can't just look for excuses for why it's not your fault. It either is or it's not. Your fee-fees don't remotely enter into it. If you fall out of an airplane without a parachute, all your screaming that gravity isn't real all the way down, that won't matter because you're still gonna splat. In the real world, you and your feelings aren't important to anyone but yourself. It's time most people grew up and figured that out.
And since the universe had a beginning, it must have had a cause. That something could be caused by nothing is not an answer that science accepts in any field of knowledge except in the case of the existence of the universe.
Nope, you're just an idiot. Because, as I already said, nothing isn't even a thing in science. Of all the cosmological models that exist, virtually none of them even address the existence of nothing. There is no nothing. There has never been a nothing. There will never be a nothing. This is just a fantasy Invented by the religious because it gets them to the emotional conclusion that they're desperate to reach. Because they're stupid and irrational. Maybe you ought to knock that off, Daniel. Just a helpful suggestion.
If an explosion happens in a science lab, the scientists try to figure out which two chemicals reacted together to cause the explosion. They don't throw their hands up in the air and say, well, that explosion was caused by nothing. Such an answer would be unsatisfactory as an explanation for the explosion.
Then it's a good thing that absolutely none of that has anything at all to do with science then, huh? This is where all of this becomes ridiculously stupid. Not too long ago, Eric Hovind and Paulogia had a talk about this very subject, and Paulogia corrected Eric and said that pretty much no atheists think that there was ever a nothing. And Eric hemmed and hawed and said that he still thought that there were some atheists who believed that. No evidence presented or anything, but he said that he'd stop saying that. Yeah, I don't buy it. He got backed into a corner, lots of theists do, and I bet you the second that he gets back to talking to his own side, he'll be saying that once again, because that's what they expect him to say. I will be extremely surprised if talking about something coming from nothing vanishes forever from his repertoire. We'll see, of course, but I don't think he's really serious about it, because I don't think any apologist is serious about coming to any logical, rational, evidence-based conclusions. Because I don't think any of them really give a damn.
Equally as unsatisfactory should be science's answer to questions of existence. Saying that creation does not need a creator is an explanation that is unjustified by the evidence of the universe.
Now, I'd ask what that evidence is, trot it out here for us so we can all see it, but we all know he couldn't do it because this is the difference between evidence and assertion. He asserted that we had a creation. Why? Because he wants to get to a creator, of course. But let's set that aside for a second and look at this a little more rationally. Prove that anything was created. Go ahead, Danny boy, back that up with evidence. Not your interpretations, not your wishful thinking, certainly not your faith. Present the evidence that shows that it's actually been created in any demonstrable way. Of course, you'll need to demonstrate that a creator exists too, something we all know that he can't manage, but that's kind of the thing, isn't it? They can't prove anything. They can just assert. And then they pretend it's science doing everything wrong because it's not agreeing with their assertions. Because these people are dumbasses. It's really not that hard to see.
Nothing that comes into existence has done so without a cause. A painting needs a painter. A house needs a builder. A watch needs a watchmaker. An egg needs a chicken.
Really? Because in case you were unaware, there's lots and lots of things out there that lay eggs. I guess everybody's a chicken now, right? Or Daniel's a complete moron. Take your pick. Because you notice what he cherry-picked, and yes, that was done on purpose. All things that we know about are creators in some sense or another. I don't know that you can call a chicken a creator since a chicken doesn't act with purpose. These are all just parts of nature. They come along whether the chicken takes any notice of it or not. It's about as stupid as saying that hair needs a hair grower. I wouldn't put that kind of idiocy past King, but that's about the level it's on. He purposely picked things that he could attach a creative entity to while ignoring things like rocks, trees, stars, things that people wouldn't automatically see as being individually created unless you start from the perspective of a religion, and then maybe. Because, let's be honest, he's not being remotely honest here. It's like proclaiming that food needs a chef by only talking about prepared dishes and ignoring everything that you can just walk into a field and pick for yourself. He's either dumb or dishonest. And let me know which one you think it is in the comments below.
The beauty of arguing that God is the uncaused cause is that he really is the only satisfactory answer to the question, where did it all come from?
Satisfactory to who? Gullible morons like King? Because you have to remember that he's talking to people who already believe. People that he assumes are on the same wavelength as he is and are going to agree with his bald assertions. Anybody else, and he gets his ass handed to him just like he is now. This is all about fifis, and it is never ever ever about facts. Because he doesn't care about the facts, does he? But let's be honest, people who are also running on pure faith and fifis, they don't need proofs for God, do they? Because they don't care. They just believe blindly. So I guess that brings us back to dumb or dishonest, right?
When applying the Kalam cosmological argument to God, this rationale follows. Premise A, everything that begins to exist has a cause.
I guess he forgot what he was talking about there for a second, didn't he?
Premise B, God did not begin to exist.
Says who? I mean, I know that's what you believe, but how do you demonstrate that's what's actually true? It's just a bold assertion, and assertions don't mean anything without being backed up with evidence. So, where is your evidence for that claim, Danny boy? He's either going to appeal to faith or the Bible or something like that. I mean, those are really the same thing, since that's just a big book of empty claims and none of that actually gets him anywhere. But he's not talking to anybody who's going to point that out, right? He's talking to more dumb people. And I guess that's hardly a surprise, is it?
Conclusion, therefore, God does not have a cause.
And that's still unsupported. Now, I'm going to write a blog post on this because a lot of people seem to get this wrong, but lots of people don't know how logical syllogisms actually work. You start with a major and a minor premise, two and only two, and a conclusion that derives directly from those two things. The premises both must be factually correct. A premise like unicorns like Swiss cheese is completely meaningless since unicorns aren't demonstrably real. In any given discussion, a premise is only considered true if, and only if, all sides involved agree with it. Therefore, this all fails rational muster because the non-religious aren't going to pay attention to his empty claims about his imaginary friend. Therefore, he's not going to be talking to us because he'd just be wasting his time. Dumbasses like Daniel are painfully transparent, aren't they?
The chain of causation ends with God because he alone has no beginning. But God is larger than simply being a being without beginning. As William Lane Craig goes on to propose, if the universe has a cause, then an uncaused personal creator of the universe exists, who, unlike the universe, is beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and enormously powerful.
Yeah, but Craig is no better than you are. Craig just randomly attaches characteristics to his imaginary friend, just like you do. I don't care what you believe. I care what you can prove. This is why we keep going around and around and around in circles with the religious. We need more than just your say-so. But that's all they have at hand. They really want it to be true. And they just make up fantastical, farcical stories about their deities to stroke their childish egos because, fifis. But that's just not enough. It's not even close. You don't get to just tell me how your God is until you can demonstrate that you have a clue what your God's actually like and have some evidence to prove it, and that's something that these mental midgets are always lacking.
All these facts about God can be known through the nature of the universe that he brought into existence.
No, they can't. You can't even show that there are any gods. This is all just, geez, wouldn't it be nice? Yeah, but nice doesn't matter one bit. Reality is what reality is, and it is what we can demonstrate it to be. Until you can get beyond your childish feelings and into the verifiable real world, everything that you say is just a ludicrous joke put out there to convince people to hand you money because they're absurdly gullible. And yes, he is still trying to sell people things as his primary function on YouTube. He says he wants to lead 1 million people a year to Christ, but if this is the best he can do, he's going to run out of dumb people pretty quick.
Consider, number 1, the cause of the universe must transcend the universe in the same way that a painter is not part of his painting.
But that doesn't make it a god. Whatever makes something else has to predate that thing that is made. That's true, but that doesn't mean that there's anything supernatural going on, or even that it's a conscious act. Nature creates snowflakes all the time. It's just physics doing what physics does. But people like Daniel here are trying to get to something that makes them happy, not just something that's true and demonstrable, and that's why this thing is so absurd. Also, he's trying to guess at what might happen outside of our universe by spitballing things inside of our universe, and that's a losing proposition right there. You can't even talk intelligently about what might lie beyond our universe, at least not at the moment. That doesn't stop people like Daniel from trying, though, for entirely emotional reasons.
2, the cause of all matter must be immaterial because to create matter, one cannot be bound by matter.
That's completely indefensible. There is a complete separation between what happens in our universe and anything that might lie beyond it if there's anything there. We are in serious, I don't know territory, but the religious, and again, they're not alone here, they're terrified to admit that they don't know. Therefore, they just make things up to try to make themselves feel better, and that's just not rational. If you don't know, then you don't know. But they're trying to get to an emotionally comforting happy land, and that's just childish. It's all about fee-fees and making money off the gullible. What do you really expect?
3, the cause of all space must be non-physical, or else the cause would be bound by space.
That assumes that all space is bound up within our particular instantiation of space-time, which may or may not be true. We just don't know. Now, I think a lot of this comes down to wanting to feel special. The religious want to be the special creation of some magical man in the sky. They want everything to revolve around them. They don't like the idea that they're just another animal because that gets in the way of their overblown emotional state. So not only do they not understand the potentialities of reality, they just don't care. Our universe is the only one because that makes me happy. We're number one. We're number one. We're number one. Crap like that. They've got real problems with nature just doing what nature does, even if it's a nature beyond what they know in their day-to-day lives. This isn't anything that they've come to rationally or intellectually. It's pure emotions based on how they'd like the real world to be. But that's not how it seems to be. Not that they actually happen to care.
4, the cause of all time must be timeless, or else the cause would be limited by time.
Same thing here. Time, like space, came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang in our particular instantiation of space-time. That doesn't mean that there isn't another version of space out there or another version of time out there someplace, maybe even multiple versions. We have absolutely no way of knowing. We don't know what the physical laws might be elsewhere in the cosmos. And whether you like it or not, we'll probably never know. That doesn't give you a license to just make something up because that gives you a warm fuzzy inside. That's really all these people are doing. Inventing fanciful stories because fifis. Pathetic, huh?
5, the cause of energy must be infinitely powerful, or it would not be able to create so much energy.
Honestly, it's always going to be the same response because he's still going on and on and on and on about his own ignorance and his own wishful thinking. So, let's just skip to the end.
6. The cause of all meaning must be personal in nature because meaning cannot arise from non-meaning. These observations from the universe reveal much about God. When I think about the universe and everything in it, I am convinced that there is a God who is there.
And I am convinced, now more than ever before, that Daniel King is a complete idiot. I mean, he starts off with the Kalam, which goes absolutely nowhere. Then he starts bobbing on Craig's knob, which also goes absolutely nowhere. Because here's where it all goes wrong, one of many, many, many places. But he said in the very end, it tells me a lot about God. Well, how the hell does he know that? Because all of this is completely arbitrary, yanked straight out of his backside because it makes him feel better. But it says so in my book. Great. How did the people who wrote the book know any of that? How do any of you know what your God is like, or even if your God is real? You don't. You just pull the, well, that sounds a lot like my God, a la Frank Turek. But you've never demonstrated that your God, your actual real God, if you had an actual real God, is like that at all. Faith doesn't get you to fact. It just gets you to fantasy. And that's all these people are doing. If he thought this video on the Kalam was going to convince anybody, he was wrong. It just shows, once again, that he has absolutely no clue what he's doing, and that's hardly a surprise. I guess we'll have to see what wonders he's going to come up with in part 7, because so far, this list has been utter crap. I guess that's to be expected though, especially coming from somebody as incoherent as Daniel King.
Bum